Tell us your story.
So I'm not going to be talking so much about technique because Wayne did such a phenomenal job. And I also paint in acrylics. I just do everything that he said, just in a way more messy and very chaotic way. He's way more, honestly, skilled, I think, than I am at this. I'm going to be more talking about the philosophy of what's motivating me and why I look at what I look at. So I'm better at just reading it off than saying it. So I've been working on this essay, and I'm just going to read this essay. And then if y'all have any questions, we can talk about that after. All right. This essay is entitled My Love Affair with a Deceased War Veteran and What He Taught Me about Seeing the World. By the spring of 2019, I was in the middle of a full-blown existential crisis. I had been working in the art department of a flagship fundamentalist Christian organization, Answers in Genesis. The organization had gained national attention after a 2014 debate between its founder, Ken Ham, and the TV personality Bill Nye. Answers in Genesis is the leading institution advocating for young earth creationism, a relatively modern and dogmatic belief that the earth is roughly 6,000 years old. According to this view, the sacred scriptures are not to be read as ancient texts shaped by literary and cultural contexts foreign to our own, but instead should be analyzed as a sort of scientific manual, offering clear, definitive answers to all of humanity's most complex and mysterious questions. Before you sneer at me for my origins in the world of fringe fundamentalism, remember I was young, I was raised in this tradition, and as much as I knew it to be flawed at the time, I quite frankly needed a job as an artist. Allow me to also mention that I am gay, and I was very closeted at this time. My employers probably felt the same way about gays and atheists that most of you feel about young earth creationists. So by the spring of 2019, I knew my time was limited. I started planning my exit very carefully. It seemed more ideal to leave on my own terms than risk being fired for my homosexual orientation. My plan was simple: resign, sell my house, and move to the West Coast to pursue a career as a fine arts painter. I was being a little unrealistic in my imagination. My existential crisis lived in this tension. I knew that the fundamentalist version of Christianity I'd grown up with could not account for my tangible experience. And maybe that's not surprising for an organization that staunchly denies the overwhelming majority of contemporary science. But I longed for something that could make sense of both my sexuality and my faith, of both my personal story and the grander narrative I still wanted to believe my life could belong to. I wanted integration. So the summer of 2019, right after resigning from my art job where I'd been hiding in the closet at that organization, and before packing up my 2007 Toyota Yaris with all my belongings and driving to a new life on the West Coast, I flew to England to visit a friend. And little did I know at the time, but this trip would change my life and my art career. At my friend's suggestion, I visited the Tate Britain, a museum with a vast collection of centuries of England's finest artists. I ambled through the galleries surrounded by works from the likes of Hockney, Constable, Holman Hunt, Leighton, and Blake. Now, in full transparency, I love art museums, but I also get a little bored. Sometimes I get overwhelmed by all the art, and I start feeling a little dead inside. Like I'm a heartless bastard with no soul. That day, I drifted from painting to painting, thinking, and then just moving on. Now, please don't judge me. I feel weird saying this. But it was 2019, and I was having an existential crisis. I was afraid to leave fundamentalism. Yeah, its promise of moral purity came bundled with rigid rules and a deep aversion to any questions. But it also felt familiar. It still felt safe. The world is actually complex, scary, very chaotic. Upon entering a large gallery commemorating artists who lived through the Great War, as we call it here in the US, World War I, something shifted. There was an unmistakable mood change, both in myself and in the curation. The air in this gallery felt serious, grim, and not a little unsettling. Much of the art was severe. It was anxious. It felt brutal. It held my attention, maybe because this is how I had been feeling. Upon one wall hung the painting The Deluge by Winifred Knights, in which she depicts throngs of scrambling, frightened people soon to be engulfed by a torrent of water that is crashing over a sea wall and racing towards them. Panic and dread pulses through this horrific scene. Nearby was Mark Gertler's Merry-Go-Round that shows soldiers with crazed, haunted eyes while they spin endlessly on a carnival ride, their faces twisted in wordless terror, betray a nightmare hidden inside of a child's game. At the center of the room stood something almost alien, a hideous machine-like figure resembling George Lucas's killer droids from the Star Wars prequels. This piece is Jacob Epstein's torso in metal from the rock drone, sculpted nearly 80 years before the sci-fi franchise that it is rumored to have inspired. This menacing metal figure captures the horror of mechanized war and the dehumanization of modern conflict. Let me just say an aside, World War I was the first major war ever fought where humans weren't fighting face to face. They couldn't see who they were killing. Technology had changed the nature of conflict. The feeling in that hall was grim, somber, and deeply uncomfortable. What were we to make of the unimaginable tragedy these artists had endured? A majority had seen the horror firsthand. The US, in many ways, had been spared the psychic wound of World War I, but the United Kingdom and Europe as a whole had not. Nearly an entire generation of young men, mostly still just boys, were shredded to pieces in the muddy foxholes crisscrossing Western Europe. This generation didn't have vocabulary like PTSD, trauma, or trigger words. They'd been to hell. Some had returned, but they had no ability to articulate it. But their arts did what their words simply could not. It streamed for meaning in the chaos. And then in this grand hall, filled with immense sorrow, I came across something that completely astounded me. It was absurd, inappropriate. It was unashamedly cheerful, whimsical, joyful, and a monster of a painting. It seemed as if the curator had completely mistook into which exhibit this lively beast of a painting was being placed. It felt almost garish amidst the surrounding context of grief. Before me stood this massive mural-sized painting of nearly 9 by 18 feet, rendered in the soft earth tones of an English spring. The artist had depicted what appeared to be a church graveyard. Rather than grief and loss, the place was alive, literally. Graves were opening. Quaint British country folk were climbing out of the earth, stretching, yawning. Some were dusting themselves off as though waking from a satisfying nap in the dirt. One man stands mid-stretch, entirely at ease. Neighbors are reuniting, laughing, catching up like they were simply at the village fair. In the distance, a crowd is gathered by the riverbank, waiting for a ferry to carry them across. Roses were blooming, and beneath the shaded eaves of the church, Christ is lounging, calm, unbothered, and relaxed. He's just looking around, taking it all in. This was Stanley Spencer's The Resurrection hookup. My gut reaction was, oh my God, I hate this hideous painting. And I could not look away. So began my love affair with Stanley Spencer, and more broadly, with regionalism. Spencer painted this epic vision of hope just 8 years after the Treaty of Versailles. He had served in the war himself as a medical orderly, narrowly avoided the bloodbath on the front lines that had claimed his brother and so many other peers. And that loss haunted him. The Great War shattered the belief that modernity was ushering in a progressive utopia. The trauma, spiritual rupture, and death, it's all there in his work, just beneath the surface. But instead of turning away from that wound, Spencer tries to transfigure it. In his resurrection paintings, of which there are many, the dead aren't rising into a distant, disembodied heaven. They're coming back home. They come back to life in the local graveyard, the village green, the nearby park. It seems as if he's trying to stitch heaven and earth back together after everything has violently fallen apart. If hell can be lived here on earth, maybe heaven can too. English regionalism, the movement Spencer is often associated with, emerged between the two world wars. It focuses on the local and the everyday. It treats ordinary life as something sacred. It's almost semi-surrealist in style and carries an air of spiritual resonance, even when it's not explicitly religious, as if there's always something metaphysical at play beneath the surface. It includes artists like Eric Rebellious, John and Paul Nash, Tristram Hilliard, Harry Epworth Allen, and many others, all of whom were significantly affected by the Great War. This didn't just shape what these artists painted, it transformed how they viewed life itself. In the face of existential disillusionment, they abandoned the glorious political narratives of empire and progress, and they turned instead to something quiet, to the intimate places, the kitchen table, a stone wall-lined country road, a familiar hill, the old sycamore tree. At the same time in the United States, regionalists like Grant Wood, Thomas Hart Benton, John Rogers Cox were doing something similar. They painted a wounded rural America, post-Depression and post-Dust Bowl. They'd seen poverty ransack the small towns they adored. But they still clung to the notion that these were still sacred metaphysical spaces. They weren't just seeking beauty, but they were seeking meaning. These artists weren't just capturing what they saw, they were reaching for transcendence. They believed the sacred could still be found right here in the soil, the land, in the place. And I believe that too. Now, I'm a Christian, and whether or not you ascribe to my faith is entirely beside the point. What I'm attempting to communicate to you is the vision that Spencer and the regionalists, both British and American, are offering to us is this: that the sacred isn't distant or abstract. It is here, in the ordinary, the boring, the local, in this place. I'm enthralled by how holy Spencer sees the place he lives. The small, seemingly insignificant town of Cookham appears again and again in his work, as does his countless depictions of stories from the Bible. To him, these don't seem to be separate realities. He is in love with place. He sees place as holy. For him, redemption and resurrection don't happen elsewhere, they happen here, They happen at home. As a gay man leaving fundamentalism, I was terrified. That community felt like a cage, yes, but it also felt safe. And I know I'm not alone in feeling this kind of existential anxiety. In our postmodern moment, we often feel unmoored, disconnected, adrift, like we belong nowhere, and yet we've constantly got to try to find our true identities, whatever that even means. I know I can't go back to the kind of Christianity that tried to squeeze all mystery out of the universe if you just read the Bible the right way, or you pray hard enough. You need only spend 30 minutes doom scrolling to feel the crushing complexity of the world. We don't have answers for so many questions. The world is messy. But I still want to believe that resurrection is just under the surface of all things. I think all of my art, sometimes subconsciously, sometimes consciously, is a search for transcendence, for rootedness, context, for meaning outside of myself. I want to have faith. I want to belong to something bigger. I want to lose myself in the immensity of a landscape and truly find myself in the realization of my own blessed insignificance. Some of my most formative memories of youth were sitting by a window watching those towering Midwest thunderstorms roll in. The kind of storms you could see coming from miles away, and you feel small, and you feel awed. There's something transcendent about that. I live for that feeling. I want to root myself in an ancient story that's still unfolding, a mythology that's still present in the soil beneath my feet. I want to reconnect with wisdom traditions that hold deeper truths than literal facts. I want to be swept into stories more beautiful than my own. I want to not have to be the main character. That's why regionalism speaks to something deep in my soul. It inspires me to capture the life of the places I paint, to uncover the mythical right here in the mundane. Through this lens, the world right here, right around me, becomes enchanted again. The ordinary becomes sacred, and the soil under my toes begins to whisper something eternal. It is in this act of accepting our context, our rootedness in time and place, our mortality and limitations, our presence in the world, that we begin to find the belonging we all so desperately are looking for. We find redemption. And this, more than anything else, is what animates everything I've ever painted. Thank you.
Do you have any questions?